But before we kind of talk about movements, I think it's really good to understand those movements are a reaction to or in response to the forces that are acting upon us. So, again, this is a 1-hour webinar presentation on biomechanics. People go to university for years to study forces and physics. So we'll just really lightly skim through it. But it's nice just to have a sort of a cover of the key components here. So tons of forces involved with mountain biking. The big one is gravity. It's constantly there, dragging us down. But it's good because without that, we would be floating away into space. So we have gravity. And if you Google the impact of gravity on a slope, I've done some work on the past with gravity on a slope versus a flat surface and how that impacts momentum when you're doing a sport, either with friction or without friction. But long story short, just understanding very simply, if we're on a slope, which is typically what we're doing when we're mountain biking, we're either going up a hill or down a hill, and then occasionally we're going on a flat surface, but usually there's some kind of undulations in there. So gravity has that impact on us constantly. And a lot of the time when we're moving our body and we're trying to create this sort of stable platform, one of the main forces we're reacting to and moving with is gravity. And then the opposing force of gravity is the ground reaction force. So just every reaction has an opposite and equal reaction. And essentially the ground reaction force is the force the ground pushes back on us. And if that ground reaction force wasn't there, we'd basically fall through the ground. And again, there's differences with ground reaction force too, when for example, the bike is coasting versus when the rider has their brakes on. And then we've got friction forces. Without friction, it would be really hard to mountain bike. It would essentially be kind of like those Red Bull hockey guys that do that downhill ice skating event. So essentially they overcome the lack of friction with putting knives on their feet and wearing a lot of padding. So without friction, it would be really difficult to mountain bike. We need friction for obviously the tires to grip, to accelerate and decelerate. We need friction for the tires to grip in the lateral or rotational planes so that when we turn, the bike can track through an arc. And then other reasons we need friction too. We need friction with the grips and the feet on the pedals. We need friction in the brake pads to convert the energy into heat so we can decelerate. And then we have inertial forces. So essentially, that really builds into things like acceleration and deceleration. So you will feel it in a car. If you accelerate, if you decelerate, your body moves forwards or backwards. And we get those similar forces when we're riding on the bike too. Centripetal forces, we've got all of those forces that sort of want to suck us to the inside of the turn when we're going through a turn. And likewise, we have centrifugal forces too that want to sort of push us to the outside of the turn, and we have to counteract those forces by essentially leaning against them. And then there's the rider side to it, the rider applied piece of the puzzle. So if we're pushing, we're pulling, we're twisting, we're leaning, the rider is constantly applying forces on the bike, and all of those things create outcomes. And really our job from a biomechanical standpoint is essentially to counteract the forces acting on us and balance against them so that we can basically stay upright and therefore in control of the bike. But yeah, for sure, if you want to dig into forces, ChatGPT is better than ever. You can kind of type in what are the main forces of mountain biking, and it will give you a pretty easy rundown of a lot of this stuff. I wish I had it back in the day when I was writing about a lot of this stuff. It would have made it a lot easier. But if you are more interested and you want to dig into it and you want to find ways to explain these forces in perhaps detailed but simple terms to either your coaches or to your students that you're riding with, definitely recommend you dig into this stuff, because with today's tools and AI and ChatGPT, it's easier than ever to read into this stuff and understand it. and not get overwhelmed to the point where you feel like you're doing a physics degree. It's pretty cool. Just a little sidebar there. So yeah, long story short, we got a ton of forces acting on us. If we want to be stable and balanced, we need to learn how to react with and balance against all of these forces.